It was supposed to be a routine hearing. The courtroom was packed, mostly press and legal observers, eager to witness what many expected to be a procedural slapdown of former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi. She had filed a surprise motion challenging a recent ethics ruling, one that implicated several prominent figures, including herself. Seated at the long-polished bench were Chief Justice John Roberts and Justice Amy Coney Barrett, both visibly skeptical from the moment Bondi entered. Pam strode to the podium in her signature bold red suit, confident and theatrical. "Your Honors," she began, "what we have here is a miscarriage of procedure," and Roberts leaned back, arching an eyebrow. Amy Coney muttered something under her breath that made him chuckle. The sound echoed louder than it should have in the hushed chamber. Bondi stiffened. "Is something funny, Your Honor?" she asked, trying to maintain control. Amy Coney didn't respond directly, just turned to Roberts again, and this time they both laughed softly. It wasn't loud. It wasn't overtly cruel. But the courtroom felt it. The laughter wasn't just about her argument, it was about her. Bondi's face froze. "I'll remind this court," she said, her voice colder now, "that I am here under constitutional right, not for entertainment." Silence. Then Roberts leaned forward and, in a tone that was more smug than judicial, said, "You may proceed, Ms. Bondi, if you have anything of substance." Murmurs stirred in the gallery. Pam clenched her fists behind the podium. She hadn't come just for the motion. She had come with something else, something neither Roberts nor Barrett saw coming. And by the time the U.S. Marshals entered the courtroom 20 minutes later, everything would change. Pam Bondi took a slow breath and placed a thick, black briefcase on the table in front of her. Her hands moved with precision, not shaking, calculated, measured. "You asked if I had anything of substance, Chief Justice," she said, opening the case with 2 metallic clicks. "I do." Roberts narrowed his eyes. Amy Coney Barrett leaned forward slightly. Pam pulled out a series of sealed envelopes, each one marked with a bright red tab. Then came the stack of notarized affidavits. Then a flash drive and a transparent evidence bag. "I move to introduce newly obtained documentation," she said, placing everything on the evidence cart beside her. "Much of this was submitted in confidence to the Office of Inspector General but has not yet been made public. Until now." Now the room was alert. Even the court reporters stopped typing for a second. Roberts adjusted his glasses. "Ms. Bondi, if this is some attempt at grandstanding, I assure you, it's not," she cut in. And then she did something no one expected. She turned slightly toward the gallery and nodded. From the back of the courtroom, a man in a plain gray suit stood. He handed a badge to a bailiff, then proceeded forward. It was a U.S. Marshal. A real one. Behind him came 2 more. The air in the courtroom dropped 10 degrees. Amy Coney shifted in her seat. Roberts leaned forward again, his face no longer amused. "Your Honors," Pam continued, her voice steady now, "these marshals are here under a sealed federal order tied to an internal DOJ investigation. Effective immediately, certain materials in this courtroom are to be secured and removed for review." Chaos rippled through the benches. Justice Barrett's lips parted, stunned. Pam looked right at her. "This hearing isn't about my ethics anymore. It's about yours." Gasps echoed across the courtroom like breaking glass. Roberts stood abruptly. "This is outrageous. What jurisdiction are you even invoking?" One of the marshals approached the bench calmly and handed him a sealed envelope. "It's all in there, Chief Justice," the marshal said. "Signed off by Deputy Attorney General Jameson, timestamped 6:41 a.m. today." Roberts tore it open, scanning the page. His expression flickered, just for a second. But it was enough. Amy Coney Barrett leaned toward him. "John, what is this?" He didn't answer right away. His hand gripped the edge of the bench. Pam Bondi stepped back from the podium and folded her arms. "You see," she said, addressing the room now, "this court mocked my presence today. treated my motion like a nuisance. But while some were too busy laughing, others were leaking. And I followed those leaks. She pointed toward the cart stacked with documents. Those folders contain phone records, private communications, and draft opinions altered after closed-door meetings, some of which never made it into official transcripts. Amy Coney turned pale. "Whose communications?" she asked, voice suddenly dry. Pam didn't flinch. "Yours. And his." The room went silent. Robert slammed his hand on the bench. "This is a stunt. Nothing introduced here has been vetted. You're out of order." But the marshals didn't move to stop her. One of them took the flash drive from the cart and inserted it into the court's overhead screen system. A black screen blinked to life. "I'd stop now," the lead marshal said to Roberts, firm but respectful. "That's a live chain of custody file. It's already streaming to federal servers." Pam Bondi turned to face the bench one last time. "You laughed at me, Your Honors. But this isn't a courtroom anymore. It's an evidence locker." The screen flickered, then stabilized. A desktop appeared, followed by a folder labeled SCCOM_privileged. The marshal clicked it open. Dozens of audio files, transcripts, and email PDFs filled the display. A few in the gallery rose to their feet. Reporters began texting furiously. Cameras weren't allowed in federal court, but phones were silently recording under benches now. The first file autoplayed. A crackling audio recording filled the chamber. Robert's voice: "If we let this motion through, it opens up precedent we can't control. We kill it." Quietly. Another voice, Amy Coney Barrett, agreed. "Frame it as meritless. And if she pushes? Laugh. Let her bury herself." The sound stopped. The courtroom didn't breathe. Justice Roberts opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Amy Coney's jaw clenched, nostrils flaring as she stared ahead. Pam Bondi was still. Watching. The marshal clicked to another file, this one a transcript from a secure group thread between several federal judicial clerks. Names redacted, except one, Coney B., lines highlighted in yellow referenced, pressure from higher up, delay tactics, and a request to scrub specific language from a dissenting opinion. At this point, even the bailiff was frozen in place. Justice Barrett finally spoke, quiet but sharp. "This should have been sealed." Pam smiled faintly. "It was. Until the seal broke from the inside." One of the marshals moved to the bench. "Justice Roberts. You are requested to step down and remain available for questioning. Effective immediately." "You can't be serious," he muttered, red rising in his face. "This is the highest court in the land, and that's why we're here," the marshal interrupted. "No one is above process." Amy Coney Barrett stood up, but didn't say a word. She looked at Pam Bondi, and for the first time, there was no mockery in her eyes. Just fear. Robert stepped down from the bench, his movements slow and mechanical, like he'd aged 10 years in the last 10 minutes. He glanced toward Amy Coney Barrett, but she didn't move. A marshal gently touched his arm, guiding him toward the side door behind the bench, the one rarely used, reserved for high-level recesses. The room remained silent, except for the dull clack of his polished shoes on the floor. Amy Coney Barrett sat frozen, her knuckles white as they gripped the edge of her seat. Pam Bondi took a step closer to the podium. "Madam Justice," she said evenly, "you're welcome to respond. This is still a court. For now." Barrett blinked once, slowly, then stood. Her voice, when it came, was hoarse. "There's context to everything you've shown. Conversations taken out of procedural setting, but no one looked convinced. Not even the clerks who had once stood at attention when she entered the room." One of the marshals approached her next. He didn't hand her an envelope. He didn't need to. "Justice Barrett," he said, "we're not placing you under arrest. Yet. But we are placing your office under federal audit. Until further notice, you are to refrain from ruling on any active matters. Barrett's lips trembled for a moment, then she sat back down, deflated. Pam turned back to the gallery. Let the record show, she said, that truth is not measured by rank, but by evidence. Today was supposed to be about silencing me. Instead, the silence now rests with those who thought they couldn't be touched. She turned, collected her briefcase, and walked out of the courtroom without waiting for dismissal. Behind her, a dozen reporters followed. So did the marshals. The doors swung closed. And the chamber that once mocked her was now a shrine to its own collapse. By the time Pam Bondi stepped onto the courthouse steps, a crowd had already gathered, cameras, microphones, protesters, curious onlookers, and plainclothes agents watching everything. She didn't stop to pose. A reporter shouted, "Ms. Bondi, what was in the affidavits?" Another yelled, "Is this the start of a full investigation into the Supreme Court?" Pam paused halfway down the steps. "I can't speak to what comes next," she said. "That's for the Department of Justice. But I will say this, when institutions protect themselves more than the people they serve, they don't deserve immunity. They deserve reform." Behind her, the news cycle exploded. Within hours, the audio recordings had gone viral. Legal analysts scrambled to decode the fallout. Senators called emergency press briefings. Former clerks began speaking off-record. Social media lit up with hashtags like #BenchLeak and #JudicialCollapse. That evening, the Chief Justice's chambers were sealed under federal warrant. Justice Amy Coney Barrett's office released a single statement, "I have no intention of stepping down." But inside the Beltway, that resolve was already being chipped away, one headline at a time. As for Pam Bondi, she boarded a plane back to Florida without saying another word. She didn't need to. She'd walked into the highest court in America, been laughed at by the most powerful judges in the country, and walked out with their power in handcuffs. Some called it revenge. Others called it justice. Pam just called it overdue. The following week, Washington was in freefall. A bipartisan Senate Ethics Committee announced an emergency review of Supreme Court internal communications. For the first time in decades, a sitting Chief Justice's integrity was officially under investigation, not just in whispers, but on record. News networks ran wall-to-wall coverage. The Bondi bombshell, they called it. In backrooms and boardrooms, panicked meetings unfolded. Judges across the country began quietly reassessing decisions that had Robert's fingerprints on them. Legal scholars debated whether past rulings should be re-examined, especially ones involving split decisions and suspiciously last-minute opinion changes. Federal subpoenas went out. Former aides and clerks lawyed up. Justice Barrett issued a follow-up statement, more defensive this time, "I regret any appearance of impropriety. But I have always acted within the bounds of judicial decorum and legal tradition." Few believed her. Meanwhile, inside the DOJ, a sealed task force was created. Quiet. Ruthless. Disconnected from political appointees. Its job, trace the leaks, verify the timeline, and determine how deep the rot really went. And at the center of it all, Pam Bondi. She declined interviews. No press tours. No podcasts. When approached on her morning runs, she simply said, "Let the evidence talk." And it did. In whispers across Capitol Hill. In redacted memos passed between agencies. And in every quiet pause during televised debates, when no one dared say Robert's name too loudly anymore. 3 weeks after the courtroom showdown, a closed-door session was held at the Capitol. Only a handful of lawmakers were invited, senior members of the Judiciary Committee, intelligence liaisons, and 2 quiet figures from the DOJ's Special Task Force. The topic, judicial vulnerability and ethics reform. It wasn't just about Roberts and Barrett anymore. Evidence tied to other justices began surfacing, small things at first. Financial disclosures with missing entries. Undocumented meetings with lobbyists. Anonymous whistleblower reports suggesting that rulings had been influenced by private, undisclosed briefings. Pam Bondi wasn't in the room. But her presence was felt in every word. Across the country, public trust in the Supreme Court had cratered. Polls showed the lowest confidence ratings in modern history. Protests popped up outside courthouses nationwide, not just from activists, but from lawyers, clerks, even former judges. Pressure mounted. A joint resolution was drafted proposing term limits for Supreme Court justices, along with a new federal Judicial Oversight Council to independently audit justices annually. The idea had floated for years. Now, it had teeth. Back in Florida, Pam Bondi sat quietly on a beachside bench, watching the sun rise. She hadn't spoken publicly since the day she left the courtroom. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number: "We need you in D.C. tomorrow. Front row. This is your legacy now." She stared at it for a moment, then smiled faintly and put the phone away. She'd gone from being mocked in court, to triggering a judicial reckoning. And it wasn't over yet. The next morning, the Senate Judiciary Chamber was packed beyond capacity. A line of people waited outside, clutching printed visitor passes. Reporters filled the press section. TV crews jostled for space. The nation's most powerful lawmakers took their seats, some with quiet dread, others with open anticipation. At the center of it all, a single reserved chair bore a simple nameplate: Pamela Jo Bondi, Special Witness, Federal Oversight Session. She entered the chamber with no entourage, no lawyer beside her. Just a folder in one hand and the same calm, unshaken expression she wore the day she exposed the highest court in the land. Senator Albright, the Judiciary Chair, leaned into the mic. "We welcome former Attorney General Pam Bondi today, not just as a legal expert, but as a citizen who brought forward evidence that forced the most consequential ethical review of the Supreme Court in generations." Pam adjusted her microphone. "I didn't come here to take a victory lap," she began. "I came because I believe in the law more than I believe in power." Every camera focused. She opened the folder and began walking the committee through her documentation: how she traced the leaks, verified the communications, and connected clerks' whistleblowing with altered judicial language. Every word was backed by source material. Every claim had receipts. What began as a courtroom embarrassment had become a federal blueprint for judicial reform. Senator Alvarez, a skeptic from the start, interrupted: "Ms. Bondi, are you suggesting that what happened was coordinated corruption? Or just carelessness at the top?" Pam looked directly at him. "I'm suggesting that arrogance isn't always careless. Sometimes, it's deliberate. And we've let it go unchecked far too long." A murmur of approval swept through the chamber. The hearing lasted 6 hours. By the end, no senator dared question the legitimacy of her findings. And when she stood to leave, they didn't just nod respectfully. They stood. Even the ones who once mocked her name behind closed doors. 2 months later, everything changed. Chief Justice John Roberts announced an indefinite leave of absence, citing health and personal reasons. Justice Amy Coney Barrett remained on the bench, but under the microscope, her decisions watched like a hawk circling a field. The new Judicial Transparency and Oversight Act passed both chambers of Congress with bipartisan support. It established mandatory disclosure reviews, an independent ethics board for federal justices, and, most significantly, an 18-year term limit for future Supreme Court appointments. It was the most sweeping reform of the judiciary in over a century. At the signing ceremony, President Carter, known for avoiding political theater, asked Pam Bondi to stand beside him. She declined the spotlight. Instead, she watched from the second row, arms crossed, a satisfied calm in her eyes. One reporter caught up with her afterward and asked the inevitable question: "Pam, what made you come forward? Weren't you afraid?" She didn't pause. "I was more afraid of what would happen if I didn't." She walked off into the crowd. And while the headlines focused on Roberts, Barrett, and a shaken Supreme Court, one fact remained: it took one woman, mocked in the very temple of law, to remind the nation that justice isn't about robes or titles, it's about courage, truth, and the people willing to demand it. Weeks after the legislation passed, Pam Bondi found herself back in Washington, not by obligation, but by request. An unmarked SUV pulled up in front of the Department of Justice. Inside, the Deputy Attorney General was waiting. "We've been watching how you handled yourself," he said, once she stepped in. "No theatrics. No grandstanding. Just precision and persistence." Pam raised an eyebrow. "Is this a compliment or a warning?" He smiled faintly. "An offer." He handed her a sealed envelope. Inside, a formal proposal. Special Counsel for Judicial Integrity, Office of Internal Affairs, a brand new division. Independent. Answerable only to the Inspector General and Congress. Designed to investigate misconduct at the highest levels of the federal judiciary. And they wanted her to lead it. Pam leaned back against the seat, reading every line. It wasn't just oversight, it was power to audit, to investigate, even to recommend impeachment proceedings if necessary. "You trust me to do this?" she asked without looking up. "We don't just trust you," the Deputy AG replied. "After what you did, we need you." That night, Pam returned to her hotel and sat alone on the balcony, overlooking the Capitol dome glowing in the distance. She had no intention of re-entering politics. But this wasn't politics anymore. This was history. And she was being asked to guard it. 2 months later, the Office of Judicial Integrity opened its doors. Its headquarters was quiet and unassuming, no marble columns, no flags flapping dramatically in the wind. Just glass, steel, and a seal on the door that read, "Truth serves no title." Pam Bondi sat behind her new desk, the first special counsel in U.S. history tasked with holding Supreme Court justices accountable. Her team was small but elite, former investigators, data analysts, and constitutional lawyers from across the country. All hand-picked. All vetted. All fearless. Their first case had already landed on her desk. A tip about a circuit judge coordinating with corporate attorneys on pre-written opinions. The kind of thing that, months ago, would have been dismissed as conspiracy. Not anymore. The nation had changed. Quietly, but irreversibly. Justice Amy Coney Barrett was still on the bench, but her voice carried less weight now. Her rulings came with lengthy disclaimers and second looks. And though she hadn't resigned, she no longer appeared at public functions. A shadow followed her everywhere. Chief Justice Roberts remained on indefinite leave. Whispers suggested he would retire quietly before year's end. No farewell speech, no ceremony. Just a page in a history book rewritten by accountability. And Pam? She never spoke of revenge. She didn't need to. She spoke of structure. Of law. Of duty. And when people asked how she kept her composure through it all, the laughter, the mockery, the smears, she always gave the same answer: because I wasn't alone. I had the truth with me. And in a city built on illusion, that made her the most dangerous person in the room.